Hey y'all, it's your girl Sarah, and as you can see by my notebook, we are doing another video today in my Naturopathic Missteps section. My gosh, it looks like I don't have hair. I still have hair. I was hoping to film this last week, but as you probably saw on the channel, I got my really great news about my liver, my autoimmune hepatitis, being in remission. So I pushed this off, even though I was super excited to talk about another part of my journey with my registered dietitian, my RDN. So just to be clear, I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I'm a lady who has gone through 2.5 years of some pretty random medical and health stuff. So I'm sharing my perspective. Please talk to your physician and your providers about what's right for you. And today is part 3 in my series about naturopathic missteps. You can go back and watch part 1, which was all about just generally how I went in and had hopes and dreams for working with a registered dietitian that didn't pan out. And then the last video in the series was about all the supplements that I was taking, how much money I was spending on supplements, and how they didn't actually help me, that I could tell. So today, part 3 is one that you might also find interesting, and that is all about gluten. And if you live in a place like I do, which is Seattle, Washington, gluten-free is definitely trendy. It is definitely a vibe. But I'm going to share today about what it was like for me to go gluten-free and go on a gluten elimination diet for a little more than a year, and where this kind of took a turn. So let's start with just putting ourselves back in time. So when I went gluten-free, I started working with my registered dietitian. And a pretty common thing that a registered dietitian will do early on in the process is put you on a more limited diet. Part of that is to take away foods that are commonly inflammatory. These could be spicy foods, these could be fried foods, these could be foods really high in fat or in fermentable sugars. These could be things like lactose. I know that I'm lactose intolerant, so I wasn't eating that, but there are a lot of foods that they might remove to bring you to some sort of baseline. And that's normal. You've probably heard about the brat diet when you're sick, just like really easy stuff on your stomach. When I was first struggling, I was on a low fiber, low residue diet that was recommended by my gastroenterologist. So there are plenty of reasons that you might want to go on a limited diet. There's nothing wrong with that. But generally the idea is we're going to put you in this protocol, and then once we've done the elimination, then we'll start adding foods back in once your body is able to tolerate them or your body's a little bit more stable. So I had never gone gluten-free before. I do love me some bread, I'm not gonna lie. But she had said, okay, well, we're gonna just take you off of gluten, dairy, and a whole bunch of other things. And my registered dietitian's perspective was, I think you have celiac disease. So let's stop and say celiac disease is a disease. Celiac disease is when your immune system reacts to gluten, which is in wheat, barley, and rye. Good thing I got my notes. And so immune reaction celiac is a different version of an autoimmune disorder. So just as my body was going after my liver, and that's not healthy, the immune response to wheat is very, very negative in the body. And so that's primarily in the small intestine, and there's a lot of damage that can happen to the villi or to the little fingers. They can go from being like really holly little fingers to like little finger nubbins or no fingers. And there are a lot of symptoms if you have celiac disease that you would start to experience. It can be changes in bowel habits. It can be abdominal pain and bloating. It can be fatigue. It can be weight loss because you're not absorbing nutrients. What's challenging with these, as if you were following along with the previous part of my journey with microscopic colitis, is that these are symptoms for so many different conditions and diseases. So when you think about microscopic colitis, when it comes to celiac, a lot of those symptoms are the same. So it can be really difficult to understand what exactly is causing these symptoms in the body. So in theory, if one removes gluten, one should feel better, right? So the idea was, okay, well, you probably have celiac disease, so we're going to see if you have it. Did I have celiac disease? The answer to that is no. And we know that because with celiac disease, there are medical tests that we can take. So kind of the gold standard is the upper endoscopy. So oh my goodness, it's an upper endoscopy or a lower endoscopy. I think it's an upper endoscopy. But I didn't have one because the blood tests that I took showed that I wasn't reacting and didn't have celiac disease. So it's the serology test, and they're looking for certain antibodies in the blood. By the way, I'm just going to say as a tip, I highly recommend, if you have a practitioner, especially someone who is not a physician, to go and do a little reading on your own. I'm not going to say research, but I'm going to say reading. Again, this is why I say go to the Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, the NHS, or whatever the equivalent is in your country, to see at a very high level, what is this disease or disorder that somebody thinks I have? And just like, what are the basics of that thing? So it's one thing to see symptoms, because again, the body has lots of symptoms and they could be related to many different things, but how would we actually know whether this is whatever this is or not? So it is a blood test. What my RDN really latched onto was two things. The first thing she latched onto is that there's a haplotype, HLA haplotype, that is a genetic predisposition to celiac disease. And I happen to carry 2 mutations of that gene. That would suggest that I have a genetic predisposition towards celiac disease. That does not mean I have celiac disease. That means I have a genetic predisposition to having celiac disease. So I think her eyes really lit up when we got onto 23andMe and saw that. And a sidebar to this is I love 23andMe. I love learning things about the genes, but there's so much that we don't know. So it can be really hard to just look at one tiny little thing in isolation. But in her mind, the evidence was mounting. Look, I was having these symptoms, and this HLA haplotype, I had both copies of that. The blood test that I took through my doctor showed up negative. So all of those blood tests said, no, Sarah does not have celiac disease. I was talked into, well, not even talked into, I very happily took a non-physician test. That's gonna be my next video, is around all these extra tests that I took and spent a few $1,000s on these tests, at least probably $5,000 on these tests. And what she had said to me was, look, Sarah, sometimes the range that the doctors have, it's not enough. And so they're just like, the medical establishment is underdiagnosing things like celiac. So according to those tests, she believed that I was a celiac. Now, let's take another time out here to say a registered dietitian is not a doctor. Actually, I think she had a lot of good ideas for different things. She helped me with a diet that helped me through SIBO. That's a whole nother video I should do about SIBO and all the things around that. But she's not a doctor. And so if you have a trusted physician and you've gone through the process and the physician says, yeah, you don't have this disease, then that's probably a good sign that you probably don't have that disease. So now I had conflicting perspectives. I had a physician saying you don't have celiac disease, actually more than one physician. And then I have my RDN saying you do have celiac. And I think she was also very keyed towards this because of her personal beliefs about gluten. First of all, she herself had celiac disease. So I understand, like, that's very serious. I am not downplaying celiac. If you have it, it is disastrous to eat gluten. So I think in her mind, if I look at this in a positive way, it could be that she was saying that she was really helping me. She wanted me to feel better, so I can hold that. So then, even if it's not celiac, then the next thing that she went towards was non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There are some people that believe this doesn't exist. I actually do believe that it exists, and I'll give you lactose as an example. So I do not have an allergy to lactose. I am lactose intolerant, which means if I eat ice cream with cow's milk, I'm gonna blow up like a balloon. I'm like gonna feel super uncomfortable. It's gonna be like a lot of bad digestive systems. Nobody wants to sit next to me on a plane, but there isn't gonna be any damage to my body. It's just really uncomfortable. My body has a hard time processing that, but it's not an immune response. So there's not damage that's happening to my stomach or to my intestines because I consume dairy. So I choose not to consume dairy. And in the case of dairy, there are lactase enzymes like lactase, you've probably heard of lactase, that can help you digest dairy more easily. So again, there is a pathological response and then there's a digestive response. So the idea for non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it's not really well understood, but I like to compare it to lactose intolerance in that the digestive tract for some people does not process gluten very well. And so it's possible that you have a similar reaction where you eat a lot of bread and you just don't feel good. And not feel good is a huge spectrum. It can be, I feel a little bit of discomfort in the abdomen to actually feel pretty terrible. Again, separating feeling from pathology. It absolutely makes sense if you feel terrible when you eat something to say, I don't want to eat that thing. That's normal. So the idea behind testing for that is the same. It is well, it's not the same. There is no test to tell you that you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It is the elimination diet. So you go off of the gluten for a while and then you start eating it again and see what happens. So I thought, what the hey, and went gluten-free. I've been through so many different diets for medical purposes in the last couple of years. It's wild, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It's not easy, but it's straightforward. It's don't eat foods that contain gluten. And unfortunately, that really did limit where I could go. And I live in Seattle area, so there's a lot of places that I technically could go. But in some places, it's really hard to get food without gluten. It's one thing to avoid bread, but it's another thing when gluten is an additive in lots of food and lots of sauces and things that you can't really see. And it could even be done with people not even knowing. So I think that's why I didn't go out and eat for a little while. And this is the part that I think is the worst about all of this and what working with my RDN actually activated me, and that was food purity. And that's really not helpful. That's continuing to sort foods into good and to bad, to say, well, I shouldn't be eating this because it's bad, and I've defined bad in a certain way. And there's a difference to me between the food is bad, and when I eat a lot of that food, I don't feel so great. When we do the halo horns for food, it's really unhealthy mentally. And here's how I know this is the case. My symptoms started to improve. And this was at a time in my medical journey when I had started new medication for my microscopic colitis. This was pre-determining that I had autoimmune hepatitis. And then I learned about my autoimmune hepatitis. But I kept eating gluten-free because I was feeling better. And this was the fear. I thought, gosh, if I start eating gluten, what if that is one of the things that's wrong with me? What if that is one of the things that is contributing to me feeling bad? So I just didn't eat it, and I didn't eat it, and didn't eat it. And all of a sudden, it had been 9 months, and I hadn't had any gluten. There was one noodle incident that I didn't realize had gluten. So then I got to this point when I realized I'm just sticking with this pattern, but why? And it was because of fear. It was what I was afraid would happen if I started eating gluten again. So this was about the time last summer when I ended my working relationship with my registered dietitian, and this was one of the drivers of that. I was at a point when I was feeling much healthier. My autoimmune hepatitis had been diagnosed. I'd met my hepatologist. I was starting medication, and by and large, I was feeling really good. All of the digestive symptoms were gone. So to me, what that says is we've got a new baseline. I'm feeling healthy. That's a great time to start reintroducing gluten. That's the one food that I hadn't reintroduced at this point from foods that I had removed during this whole time period in my life. And she said, no, it's a bad idea. And I tried to understand. I asked a lot of questions. And I found out she still believed that I was a celiac, that I had celiac disease. Or if not, severe non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Then we went, and this is where it took a turn, was, well, but they spray glyphosate on these things. So now we were going down the GMO route, the pesticides route, her telling me how dangerous Cheerios were. And this is when we went to Do Town, which is food purity. It's all about food purity. It's all about making sure there was nothing bad ever that would be in your food supply and that gluten would just cause damage. So we ended our working relationship. We were at our end of the sessions and she kept saying, we're not done. We have more to learn. And I had said, I need a break. So again, this is a sense of I have a practitioner that's disagreeing with my physicians. And I thought, this is just not working for me anymore. So what happened? So I got through a vacation that I had planned, and I had a business trip that I had planned. So I wanted to be like back home in my home base. We were going to visit my in-laws for Christmas for the first time in a few years. And I couldn't imagine doing a trip like that, not eating gluten. So I went to my primary care physician, Dr. M, and said, hey, what is the protocol for reintroducing gluten? And she looked at me. She said, what protocol? And I said, oh, my registered dietitian had said there was a protocol, but she didn't want me to start doing it. And my doctor said, will you eat gluten? And I said, yeah, I know, but what's the protocol? And she said, eat a small serving of pasta. And I thought, that can't be right, but that's exactly what you do, is you start eating a small quantity of that food. And goodness, I had a lot of anxiety, but I did it, and I was fine. And then 2 days later, I had a slightly bigger serving of gluten-free pasta, and I was fine. And then I had the most delicious slice of bread, and I was fine. And then I had a cake made of regular flour, and I was fine. So long story short, I don't have celiac disease, as blood tests have continued to prove. And I do not believe I have non-celiac gluten sensitivity because I am eating gluten. Now, to be fair, I'm not eating bowls of pasta, but that was never how I ate to begin with. When I want to eat a thing, I'll eat a thing. And when I want to eat something else, I'll eat something else. So it felt freeing just to go back to that type of experience with food again. Also not worrying, well, is there gluten in that? And she had even gotten to the point, my RDN, of telling me, well, you probably need separate pans and separate cutting boards. And if your husband is opening regular flour in the kitchen, you shouldn't be there. Like, this is way, way off the charts. This is for people who have celiac disease. I do not have celiac disease. So what am I hoping that you take away from this? I think it's so easy to get paralyzed and to be fearful and to think, well, if I just control these certain things, and gluten or what you put in your mouth is something that you control, but that can lead so quickly to disordered eating and to me thinking that these things were good and bad. It could have been that I came out of this and I started eating gluten again and I thought, I don't feel so great. You know, I wasn't maybe physically ill, but I just felt kind of gross, or I felt bloated, or I didn't feel like myself. But that didn't happen for me. Now, again, granted, I haven't eaten a whole loaf of bread in one setting, but when I just went back to eating like myself, I'm just eating like myself. So it's really easy to demonize or to put food into different categories when it doesn't have a pathological response. It's not going to harm you. It's not harming your body. So the more that I step back from this experience, I just continue to see that I was desperate. I wanted answers. And I think I found someone who had a lot of good ideas, but then digging into it, realizing that it's not backed by science or evidence-based medicine. And it's just a lot of hope, and it's a lot of hope and a lot of fear together, ironically. So this is not me telling you to eat gluten or not eat gluten. You do you. If you have celiac disease or you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, like, be safe, make the right choices with your provider, but work with a medical doctor, work with someone who can talk about the pathology of this to you, because it's way too easy to get into those food purity loops and make choices that actually aren't healthy. When we remove whole food groups, there are a lot of nutrients that we're not getting. That's another reason I was really low on energy, not eating the whole grains that I was before. Just things weren't as filling. And I would always look at things that I got out in the world with fear, like, well, technically oats are gluten-free, but what if this was processed in a facility with, right? That's where the anxious mind goes, and where you think you can control something, which, first of all, you can't. And second of all, maybe it's not even you. So that's my story, going gluten-free and now back on gluten. And so I hope this is helpful, just to hear my experience and to continue to encourage you to really look at the practitioners you're inviting into your life with discernment. There are tons of fantastic ones out there, I'm sure. But knowing what I know now, I would have chosen differently. So next in the series I'm going to be working on is about all of the non-medical establishment tests. So if you want to know all about microbiome tests, parasite testing, mold testing, I never did frequency testing, but I'm a little bummed that I didn't. I did get a chakra assessment several years ago for something completely unrelated. Anyway, so if you want to hear about medical tests that you can pay a lot of money for, come back to the next video in this series and I'll tell you all about what it was like to collect mold from different parts of my house. All right, be safe, be well, everyone. Bye.